Hey everybody, what's going on? Hope you're all weathering this storm okay and doing your best to soldier on and find some things to keep you engaged. I am down in the little basement room of our new house I've been working on converting into a studio. I unexpectedly had some time on my hands lately, and here's the little sub pump room. Is now the vocal booth. So, trying to make the best of a bad situation here. Hope you guys are all doing the same. So I was really excited, intimidated, and kind of terrified at the prospect of doing one of these micro lessons, just because I feel like a lot of the dynamic of a class is like engaging with you in person, and kind of hearing your feedback and riffing off of that. So it was kind of terrifying to me to just have to talk at a screen for 30 minutes. But I've kind of been in the back of my head bouncing around what I wanted to talk to you guys about. And late last night, around 3 a.m., I started making a bunch of notes. So I feel like where we got to in class that we didn't really get to dive in on properly, just because it's such a ambiguous part of the process, probably the most ambiguous part of the songwriting process, is how you actually sort of get started when you're looking at a blank page. And I wanted to kind of give you guys a tool that I think is really helpful to sort of break through that, and something that you can sort of grow into a practice to sort of break through that. And there is kind of a method to it that you can start using on your own, and I'll kind of set you up with a prompt at the end. But what I wanted to talk about today was stream of consciousness. So I don't know, how many of you have heard the phrase before or anything, but I wanted you to think about it as it's giving you a new tool in your toolbox for songwriting that you can practice with. If you think about it, right now is a pretty ideal time to be a writer. You're kind of getting all of the things, we're all getting all of the things that writers crave, right? Solitude, everything kind of shut down. There's nowhere to go. You just are kind of alone with your thoughts. So I thought this would be a good opportunity to explore some new modes of writing. So this tool of stream of consciousness, I think, is useful for the hardest part of songwriting to explain, which is where and how do you start. So I think you can look at stream of consciousness as a tool to help break up writer's block, to generate new ideas, to help get you outside of your everyday states of consciousness where you're reasoning and you're editing as you go, and sort of discover what it is you have to say that's useful and interesting. Because I think the most terrifying thing of the whole songwriting process, and definitely what we got into in class, was you're just looking at a piece of paper and it's like, where do you even start, right? And we usually had briefs in class of like, all right, this is what we're writing about today. But on your own, I know that's not the case, right? So I think the stream of consciousness is really helpful tool to find out what it is you may be dwelling on without even realizing that you're dwelling on it. Also, in a deeper sense, I think it draws on the idea that the things you're writing are drawn out of pure, unfiltered consciousness, and that they have a power and resonance that's greater than words that are chosen by our everyday awareness, just trying to fit a certain purpose. So kind of some of the examples I'll give, you'll hear that raw power that these words have that are written through stream of consciousness, where they're just so outside of our normal realm of experience. It's almost like Alice in Wonderland in nonsense world, where these lines that we're drawing from this place are able to sort of resonate in a more powerful way, even though our everyday realistic minds can't necessarily say what they're about. So, what is stream of consciousness? So to just kind of start way back, the idea that there's no individual consciousness that is contained within us, but that we're all receivers of one consciousness. And as artists, all that's being done is to tap into that one consciousness from our unique vantage point and report what we see. So a lot of the Western idea of what we're experiencing is that, you know, all of our thoughts and everything are just trapped up here in our brain, and we're sort of going in there and pulling things out. But I think the idea of stream of consciousness really relies on the fact that that's not really how it works, that there is sort of one consciousness, and this goes into a lot of Eastern thought, which we'll dip a little bit into. But as a writer, as an artist, what you're doing is sort of like putting your antenna up in the air and capturing some of that and bringing it onto the page with you. I think one of the first examples in Western culture of stream of consciousness writing might be Moses writing the Ten Commandments. So it's that idea of like writing without consulting your critical mind. So you're letting a stream of words flow onto the page, uninhibited by any attempts to edit, shape it, or revise it, which is kind of a terrifying prospect, right? It's not anything we're used to doing. It's especially more intimidating if you're talking from like the freestyle perspective of just having to speak those words out. So to give you like a little bit of context historically and culturally, in our modern awareness, the idea of stream of consciousness writing was really introduced and became mainstream through like the beat poets of the 40s and the 50s. The most well-known examples are going to be Jack Kerouac and Allen Ginsberg. So before I get too much into talking about it, I'll just kind of read a couple selections from each of them that kind of give you a little bit better of an idea of what stream of consciousness can feel like. So this is from a short poem by Jack Kerouac called A Sudden Sketch Poem, and I think it kind of defines what this style can feel like. Gary's sink has a shroudy burlap. The rub-brush tinware plout leans on right side like a red woman's hair. The faucet leaks little love drops, the teacups upside down with visions of green mountains and brown, lousy Chinese mysterious upheights. The frying pan still wet, the spoons by two petals of flowers, the wash rags hung on edge like bloomers. I don't know what to say about the dishpan, the soap, the sink itself inside, or what it's hidden underneath. The bomb burlap shroud flap except 2 onions and an orange, an old wheat germ, wheat meal, the hoodlatch hieroglyph with the cross that makes the devil hiss, the upper coral scents and soups, and fast condiments, curries, rices, roaches, reels, tin, tip, plastics, toothbrushes, and armies of insulated schiller, squozen gum drop. So you can kind of hear what I was saying before with, at times it almost gets into nonsense words, but kind of what carries it through is like the natural melody of the language, the sort of rhythm that starts to develop there. And you kind of hear a musicality that emerges out of all of it. And you also get a real sense of him just maybe sitting in the room at his friend's house and trying to describe everything that he sees, and also kind of giving a little bit of an emotional reaction to it at the same time. So that's kind of I think a really good example of what stream of consciousness can sound like. Here's another example from Allen Ginsberg, who I mentioned a minute ago. So this is his most famous poem, How. I'll just read you a quick little nugget from it, but both of these guys really embraced the idea of stream of consciousness, and kind of the simple word that they had for it was, your first thought is your best thought. So kind of writing with that intention and mindset to sort of grab ideas right out of the air. So I'm just gonna kind of jump into the middle here. And the idea with Hal, it was written in tribute to his friends, so he's kind of describing a lot of different crazy adventures they had, who chained themselves to subways for the endless ride from Battery to Holy Bronx on Benzedrine until the noise of wheels and children brought them down, shuddering, mouth-racked and battered, bleak of brain, all drained of brilliance in the drear light of Zoo, who sank all night in submarine light of Bickford's, floated out and sat through the stale beer afternoon in desolate Fugazi, listening to the crack of doom on the hydrogen jukebox, who talked continuously 70 hours from park to pad to bar to Bellevue to museum to the Brooklyn Bridge, a lost battalion of platonic conversationalists jumping down the stoops, off fire escapes, off windowsills, off Empire State, out of the moon, yakety-yakking, screaming, vomiting, whispering facts and memories and anecdotes and eyeball kicks and shocks of hospitals and jails and wars, whole intellects disgorged in total recall for 7 days and nights, with brilliant eyes, meat for the synagogue cast on the pavement. So I think you kind of hear the same thing you did with the Kerouac poem, where it's you're getting these flashes of images, and you're also kind of getting reflections from the writer's emotions about them as they're talking about them too, right? Because they're kind of pulling through memories, but then it quickly goes into these whole nonsense realms, right? But you can kind of feel the power of these images that they carry, sort of being drawn purely from the psyche like that. So now that you kind of have heard a little bit what that sounds like in writing, let's talk a little bit about where that idea came from with them, right? This was not an original idea of theirs. So the beat writers drew heavily on Eastern teachings from Hindu traditions for their understanding of what they were accessing through this writing method. So they, were devout practitioners of meditation, and they studied many of the, practices that like yogis in Hindu traditions espoused. So they incorporated that into the style that they were writing. But the general idea is that you're tapping into your higher consciousness, sort of beyond your everyday state of logic-based awareness. So in your everyday state of mind, you're thinking about what you need to do that day. You're thinking about, do people like you? Do they not like you? Why not? What bills you haven't paid, what you want to do with the rest of your life, right? All those thoughts are kind of part of our everyday logic and awareness. So with stream of consciousness, the whole notion is that you're sort of overriding that everyday state of mind. And by doing that, you're able to sort of tap into something deeper than what you even realize that you're thinking about. So like to go back to the beats for a second, with Jack Kerouac, who I mentioned before, his most famous book and sort of what really popularized this whole style of writing was On the Road. It was kind of a book about a few years of him traveling and hitchhiking with his friends and discovering America. It's sort of, a lot of it is written in that same style of that poem, but also, a lot more of a narrative to it. But it's kind of famous the way that he wrote out the whole original manuscript was on a giant roll of toilet paper, because it was, or maybe big sheet of paper. I don't know. Toilet paper probably wouldn't hold together. But it was coming out so fast. He was just writing it in one long stream of thought. And kind of the same thing with Allen Ginsberg with Howl. I mean, this poem's like, maybe 25 pages long, right? And they're sort of writing this all as it's coming to them on that first thought, best thought idea. So On the Road was one of those books that just became like mandatory reading, and especially was kind of the germ that started the whole 60s counterculture movement, right? So we're going to talk a little bit about how, what artists were influenced by that and how. But I think the freedom of this style, especially culturally coming out of World War II in the 1940s and sort of the very like conservative restrictive feeling of culture, of it being sort of a monoculture where there wasn't really room for being outside of the box. I think this stream of consciousness writing was so well received because it felt so free and so fresh. And they were also heavily influenced by the jazz music of the time, which was basically musical stream of consciousness. So we'll talk a little bit more about that, but like bebop jazz, which was not completely, but very free form, where the soloists were composing music as it was coming to them. So I think they were really influenced by jazz in how they chose to write and to develop this stream of consciousness method. So the beat writers heavily influenced early rock and roll at the highest levels, and I think the best and easiest example to point to of this is one of the most groundbreaking songs in sort of early 60s counterculture rock and roll was Bob Dylan's Subterranean Homesick Blues. Let's see. Bob Dylan, Subterranean Homesick Blues. So he has this stream of consciousness beat poem basically set to what was like a Chuck Berry style talking blues. And it kind of, I think, set music on fire a little bit. So I'll just kind of read a little passage from it here. Got the Bob Dylan Bible here. Johnny's in the basement mixing up the medicine. I'm on the pavement thinking about the government. The man in the trench coat, badge out, laid off, says he got a bad cough, wants to get it paid off. Look out, kid, it's something you did. God knows when, but you're doing it again. You better duck down the alleyway looking for a new friend. The man in the coonskin cap and the pig pen wants $11 bills and you only got 10. Maggie comes fleet-foot, face full of black soot, talking that the heat put plants in the bed, but the phone's tapped anyway. Maggie says the many say they must bust in early May. Orders from the DA. Look out, kid, no matter what you did. Walk on your tiptoes. Don't try no doze. Better stay away from those that carry around a fire hose. Keep a clean nose. Watch the plain clothes. You don't need a weatherman to know which way the wind blows. So you see Bob Dylan sort of borrowing that style of stream of consciousness from the beat poets and fusing it into the Chuck Berry style rock and roll, and sort of bringing this freedom of expression from stream of consciousness into pop culture, into popular music. And Dylan went out of his way to sort of invite the comparison. And if you want to pause and go on YouTube and just watch the video for Subterranean Homesick Blues, one of the first, great music videos too, you'll see Allen Ginsberg, the author of Howl that we talked about, standing in the background the whole time, sort of in a rabbi's dress. So Bob Dylan very much wanted to, acknowledge the influence there and sort of bring this freedom into these, what up till then was a pretty formulaic style of music. So another place that you can really start to hear stream of consciousness really hit pop culture in a new way is when these guys really started employing it. So for those of you that don't know, that is the Beatles. And you really start to hear in some of their like records, after 1965, 66, where they start really employing the stream of consciousness style that we're hearing in Kerouac and Ginsberg. Songs like Come Together, I Am the Walrus, and Across the Universe kind of give us some of that unfiltered writing style. So I'm just going to read a little bit from Across the Universe to kind of let you hear the similarities between some of the things we've already been reading. Words are flowing out like endless rain into a paper cup. They slither while they pass. They slip away across the universe. Pools of sorrow, waves of joy are drifting through my open mind, possessing and caressing me. Images of broken light which dance before me like a million eyes, they call me on and on across the universe. Thoughts meander like a restless wind inside a letterbox, they tumble blindly as they make their way across the universe. Sounds of laughter, shades of earth are ringing through my opened ears, inciting and inviting me. Limitless, undying love which shines around me like a million suns and calls me on and on across the universe. So that poem, or that song, feels like it could even be a love letter to the whole notion of stream of consciousness, right? I mean, most of what he's describing is sort of how he's opening up his mind to sort of let these thoughts and ideas filter through him. And then when you get into something like Come Together, where it's here come on flat top, he come grooving up slowly, he got juju eyeballs, he's one holy roller. You hear the results of what he's talking about in Across the Universe, him sort of employing that method to write in this new free way. And I think, as much as the Beatles were also inspired by the beats of Kerouac and Ginsberg and how Bob Dylan was fusing that into rock and roll, they also were studying where the Beats were studying, which was these Eastern Hindu teachers, where they learned about meditation and accessing higher consciousness. And the chorus of Across the Universe is a Hindu mantra, Jai Guru Deva Om. So you're hearing them using these mantras that they're learning and sort of referencing in the same way that Bob Dylan did by having Allen Ginsberg stand in the back of the video. They're referencing their Hindu teachers and this Eastern philosophy and this new understanding that they're gaining as being responsible for the words and the poetry that they're writing now. So at a certain point, it begins to like mesh with or kind of be looked at in popular opinion as like psychedelic music. Best example of that would be Donovan's Mellow Yellow. You can kind of hit pause and listen to that if you like, but it's more of that nonsensical I'm just mad about Saffron, she's just mad about me, I'm just mad about 14. It's kind of the free word association. But I think what starts happening in the late 60s too is all of this method of stream of consciousness gets attributed to using psychedelics and drugs, which were certainly a part of what was going on at the time. But I think what it did was really cheapen the power of the art in the public perception by just kind of being able to write it off as this drug-induced trance that these artists were going on, and that there was no meaning to the words, there was no meaning to the art they were creating. So I definitely don't think that drugs are necessary at all to use the stream of consciousness mode, and I think in a lot of ways drugs, especially in the way that this art was being received by the public, did a lot of harm to being able to just recognize where this poetry was coming from, that it wasn't from drugs, it was that they were canceling, they were overriding their everyday reality and tapping into something higher. So you can see this carried all the way up into today. I mean, this is a style of writing that changed music as we understand it, from the 60s on. But as I said, the beats were very influenced by bebop jazz and the way that they were taking the forms of jazz music, which, was really kind of the first use of stream of consciousness, but it was musical rather than lyrical. And was the great American original creation, right? Jazz had never existed anywhere in the world. So that freedom that comes from jazz and then is carried into the beat writers and is carried into rock and roll can still be found everywhere today. And I think some great examples to check out of just something more obviously in line with the things that we've been saying are like, listen to the album Odelay by Beck and the song Devil's Haircut. I think is the perfect example of the same style of free association that you're hearing in Howlin' and Kerouac and in Subterranean Homesick Blues. And there's sort of an unnameable power that's there in the music, even though your everyday awareness mind can't pin down like, what is a devil's haircut? You still feel it resonate. And then obviously so much in hip hop and freestyling relies on this notion of stream of consciousness. I think the best examples would be like, Lil Wayne's mixtapes, right? Of just pure stream of consciousness, right? But without the writing component, it's literally just coming from, the one consciousness onto the recording. So that's kind of a really general overview of a little bit of cultural context of how stream of consciousness sort of entered mainstream music and where you can find it and sort of how it originated in Eastern traditions of meditation and of accessing higher consciousness. And you can find it all throughout what am I thinking of? Go back to some of the writers that we talked about. If what you were hearing was interesting to you, and sort of dig a little deeper with Kerouac, read Howl, definitely read On the Road, and sort of see what the roots of that style were. I think that can be really helpful to you. But now I want to get into how you can use it as a writing technique. So think of it as a way of sort of mining consciousness, sort of excavating things that in your everyday state of mind are just not going to make it onto the page because your everyday state of mind is so crowded with all the things we mentioned before, your to-do lists, your insecurities, your plans for the future, your memories. So stream of consciousness is a way of getting past those to sort of draw out thoughts that are unfiltered by that. So I think a big thing that is really helpful for is sort of removing that pressure of the clean slate where you're looking at a blank piece of paper and you're like, what do I have to say? I think that in the same way that we talked about like doing brain dumps with your groups during our writing briefs, you're sort of doing a brain dump with yourself to get original ideas and then reshape them into structured forms. So don't think about it as like you're going to be sitting down and just writing freeform something that's going to be completely done and finished. It's more that you might fill up pages and pages of nonsense, but then within that you'll find a line that you really like, and then that starts a new song. So sort of looking at it at first, at least, as a way of just excavating something that can kind of help you break through that initial fear, I guess, of the clean slate and of not having a starting point. So really where you start is just sitting down with the intention of letting the words flow out onto the page without thinking, revising, editing, or stopping anything. So you literally do not stop writing while you're sitting down to do this. You can try typing or writing by hand, free word association, letting each word choose the word after it. And you can kind of hear that really well in the Kerouac stuff, right? wheat meal, the hood latch hieroglyph with the cross that makes the devil hiss. Ah, the upper coral scents and soups and fast condiments, curries, rices, roaches, reels. At times you hear the brain just go to alliteration and things that feel comfortable to it and feel like it flows, but you're just getting in that practice of sort of letting your imagination run away and draw out combinations of words that you just normally wouldn't be able to get to. I recommend playing some instrumental music along with you as you write. I really don't recommend having things with words in there because I think you're going to want all the words in the room to sort of be focused on what's coming from you and not to be affected by that at all. And like I said, the Beats were big fans of writing to bebop jazz and sort of going into jazz clubs and listening to the music and then just going home and writing sort of inspired by that. And I think a form of music that's really improvisational is as close to stream of consciousness as you can get in music. So finding something that sort of has that same spontaneity to help the words to get flowing. So my kind of experience with this personally and my starting point with kind of using this as a tool in my own songwriting was I had a job at a hotel by the airport, the Hampton Inn, and I worked there at night, and there wasn't much to do. I would start around 8, and I'd be there till like 2 or 3 in the morning. So I'd just be kind of drinking coffee, and there was a computer, and I would just begin this practice of giving myself a set amount of time and just writing. And I had, a floppy disk at the time, and would just download, whatever I did that day, and maybe some of it would find its way into a song, or it would just get chalked up as practice if there was nothing I liked, but sort of got into that habit. And I think that's where I really started to first develop the habit, and it's been something I've been able to use my entire life, and sort of just gets more malleable the more I've used it. So I kind of have more control over being able to turn it on as I need to, because I spent that time practicing at it and really committing to the process and spending those hours just typing whatever it was that was coming out. I'll occasionally stumble across some of it in old notebooks or things like that, and it's like, or sometimes it's really cool. You never know. But it's just getting into that flow state of being able to write without any inhibition is going to really help you in your songwriting. So the way I recommend trying this out for the first time is to give yourself a timed time period to work in. So set a small amount of time to get started, maybe even just 3 minutes. Set a timer. Have no expectations for any of it being good. Just don't stop writing. Even if it's the same word over and over again, let it flow out. So even if you find yourself just clacking nonsense keys, keep your hands moving. Let each word just decide what the next one will be. And sort of start to work your mind into that. And, as you're able to do 3 minutes and keep writing continuously, then try 5, then try 10. And, it's not a competition. It's not a marathon. It's just learning what your own process can be, discovering what it is you have to say, just kind of doing that excavation process. Think of it as, trying to catch lightning in a bottle. And, it's a very mysterious origin of where any lyric ideas come from at all, right? It's kind of just things popping into your head, right? So this is kind of part of an important training process as a writer, to have the mindset that you are not just waiting for inspiration to strike, waiting for a muse to inspire you, but that you're willing to run around in a lightning storm with a jar trying to catch a bolt. So that intention of sitting there ready with a net for when inspiration does strike. That's sort of the shift in what this mindset is. If being a writer is what you want to do and being a songwriter is what you want to do, you need to go from you need to shift into an active mindset about how you're looking for inspiration. But you're much more likely to capture good ideas when they come if you build habits of preparedness and routines of consistently working on new songs. One more metaphor. Look at it as going fishing. You may end up throwing back most of what you catch, but the more you fish, the more keepers you start to bring home. So you'll feel yourself develop at this the more you do it, and you'll start to grow in confidence and notice that you're able to control it more, and to sort of start off with an intention and then use this free form, and then kind of glean it as you go. But really looking forward to seeing what you guys come up with. Feel free to email me, when you try this for the first time, how you like it, if it's cool, if you're not able to do it, if you want some more tips on maybe how to get started with it. But I'd love to see what your first 3 minutes look like if you want to send those over. And let me know kind of, what music you listened to as you were doing it, what was helpful. And, if there's any more recommendations or anything you're looking for, I'd love to send you some more stuff. So just let me know. Hope everybody is being well and staying safe. And see you guys on the other side of this.